Just checking. Can you guys hear me all right? Fantastic. So yeah, just a quick one. As Robin said, my name is Wilson. Call me Will if you like, or call me any other name if you like. That's fine, feel free to. I'm Google developer, expert in web technologies, Angular, and today I'll be talking about data-driven frontend, the new Jira navigation. All the journey that we took last year to improve the navigation, not just in Jira, but in all Atlassian products, and the things that we've done, the data that we used, the approach that we used, and the benefits, the pros and cons of this. So yeah, as Robin said, I just published in my free time a book about nodebots. So if you like to play with JavaScript and sensors or something physical like Arduino, Raspberry, and pretty much everything that you like, just go in this link, download it. It's free. You can pay me a beer or a coffee if you like, but you don't need to. And enjoy. This crazy guy is me. I won't tell much about myself. And let's just jump into the content. So yeah, 2002, that was a great year. Atlassian started, and the bigger product was Jira. That was on the first landing pages that we used to do some ads for Jira and explain the product, the idea, and the benefits of use that. And that was the first navigation. If you guys can see, and on the side that we have the yellow border, and that's one of the pieces of navigation. I'll explain more the concepts about it, but keep in mind that the blue side, it's called global navigation. So it's a place that we have the menus, that we have the icons. You can click, you have all the interactions, and the white side is the page content itself. Now let's go deep. I'm already talking about the components, so let's talk how navigation works. I know that's after lunch, so I just want to do a quick exercise for you folks. And just for a second, take a deep breath. Expire. Good. Now let's start. You guys ready? Come on, we can do more than this. Are we ready? You sure? Okay, so I'll do a quick one. How navigation works in our product. So we have a navigation with global content. It can pretty much change based on the resize when the user just resizes the browser. It receives drawers, so when you click on the icons, just open on the white screens, and you can interact with that. Inside we have AK, content, and S, which is pretty much the page content, which receives a stack. What's a stack? Stack is a page which has a prop called navigation. It can be a skeleton or navigation. Skeleton or navigation. So we have a prop called navigation, which can be skeleton navigation. So it can be pretty much anything. And inside of that, we have grid, inside that grid column, and that's a page. Quick, right? Yeah, that was the first version of navigation, and that's how complex it was. And that's why every time that we look at the code, we had this expression. What is going on? So yeah, first problem, how to solve the problems related to the code. We had a lot of over-engineering. Keep in mind that was the code that born in 2002. And we are talking about 2018 when we started this migration. Every time we look at the code, we had this feeling. It was not ideal. Sometimes it was really hard to read. And yeah, that's pretty much what happened. But more than this, solve problems with code is something that is visible for us. So how can we solve the architectural problems? Just a simple navigation had to interact with like 15 APIs, which was running in background. Eventual consistency and different patterns and standards that we are using in that application. How we can solve those problems. And a few examples are those ones. Which approach we use for client-side or server-side render? Can we use something lazy configurable, let's say async components, or try to avoid some requests for that menu? Or dev experience, how can we improve the dev experience? If you look at the code, it was not straightforward to understand. And how can we improve that? How can we innovate? How can we try to enable other developers and other teams to start experimenting more, like do A/B testing, for example, or even try some performance manipulation? Let's try use GraphQL instead of HTTP requests and see what the benefits are. there was no way to do this in 2018 at that moment with this component. And the first measure that we got, because when we start something like that, you need to have at least a minimum of coverage of the things, how the things are working right now, how the things will work in the future, to show some benefits. We did those changes, and we have to do some improvements. The first one was AppDex. AppDex is a measure based on the user conversion and the user happiness, let's say. It's not something that is Atlassian only. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find a lot about AppDex that's broadened. And the way that we can measure that's relatively simple. So you can go, you have a specific measure of satisfied users, let's say satisfied requests and page loads, and some number that will say, oh, that's the minimum that we can have for a user which are not satisfied, maybe because it takes longer, your page to load, or something else. And divide by 2, and at the end, you divide the whole value for the total of samples. A quick one is like this. We had like 170 requests, but 20 was the number that we didn't like, and divide by 200. So we had the AppDex of 90. This is a score which starts in 0 and ends in 100. So it's quite cool, right? However, we were not there. That was a number, and that's pretty bad. 60 is something that's pretty bad. A little bit more than average, but not good. And usually, we have problems like this. Memory leaks in the browser, and the users ending up in a page like OpenSnap in Chrome. And yeah, not ideal at all. The first feeling is do something like this when you see the users complaining about. But yeah, with the whole idea, we knew all the problems. We were aware of them. And now that we have the whole picture, how we can improve that. And with this idea of improvement and make it better, we came the new component called Navigation Next, which can be a really good solution. That's an example. And in the blue area, we still have the concept of global navigation. So we have the menu and all the things. And in the white area, we have the page content. I'll show you a real-life example. Can everyone see this? Let me increase just a little, just in case. So yeah, this is one example running in an open source project that we have called Alaskit. It has all the components that we are creating and stuff. So you can just come here and play around. That's the new component. And yeah, we can pretty much do anything we like. We can sort items. That's the way that things work in Jira. We can try play with something. That's what we call drawer. So usually when you go to Jira and try to search, we have the search option there, and you can play with that. That's using the new component. Here we have async loads and all the thing, or everything. So if I load the page, it will take some time, but usually you see everything load asynchronously. The benefits of that is that we decrease the page load a lot. I'll describe more of this in the middle of the talk. And the way that we are organizing right now I can talk really slow. We don't need to go in that rush that we had before. So we have a component called Navigation Provider, which wraps the whole page. So it gets some information, some required information to the page, maybe user configurations and things like that. And inside, we have another one called Layout Manager. It works with, like, maybe you have a theme, maybe you need to use client side in one page and server side render in the other, so it handles that. And inside, you have the page content. So way simpler than before. So some wins in this transition was, first, we were able to do smooth transitions with API, not just smooth transitions and CSS and styles, more smooth transitions in our interface, our components. Instead of write 15 components to do a single menu, you can just write one, and that's all. We were using emotion as CSS and JS, which was, in my point of view, was a good decision. It has broader support for different approaches, client-side and server-side, and well optimized. We were covering 2 scenarios, client-side and server-side, and we were able to do a progressive rollout between the old navigation and the new navigation. For people who know how NPM works, if you have the same package with the same namespace, it would be really tricky to do a migration like that. And one thing that we had to keep in mind that we needed to be able to do progressive rollout. That means that 10% of the users will be using the new navigation, and 90% will be using the old one. And we can keep measuring and increasing until we have 100% of the users. One standard that we define is every single integration like that, we need to write async components. So in this example, we're using async imports to the new component and the old one, and we were turning on and turning off based on the flag. So we were doing the progressive rollout with this piece of code. But because Jira had few configurations, we ended up creating 2 files. Fair enough. But still, it was not impacting the main bundle. So the user was not impacted with this transition. Actually, it was way better than before. Just with this change, we decreased around 2 seconds in the page load of every single page in Jira. And the way to deal with that in the other components was quite straightforward. In the render, we are using React. And in the render function, the render method, we were checking if the navigation was loaded, if the async import was finished. If yes, use the navigation. Otherwise, use the skeleton. As a final result with this change, we got a global updex of 5. And I'm not talking about a specific page. I'm talking about the whole Jira, which was massive. Few of those pages had just with this change increase of 15. And that's not something simple to do. So it was really exciting. Yeah, and I love this GIF. However, what if we miss something? In a migration, who here already work in a migration, in a front-end migration? Yeah, a few hands. Migration is something that's really tricky because usually it's a code that's really old. It has a lot of knowledge there, but it doesn't have so many coverage, and maybe the test architecture is not that well done, or even you don't have enough context about that. And talk about a product which has more than 1,000 feature flags, yeah, we probably missed something. But we need to work in the worst scenario, right? What if we miss? As example, how long here is 2 seconds? Keep that question in mind. And to give you some idea of how much is 2 seconds, this is 2 seconds. But this is 2 seconds as well. That's the time that the navigation component loaded asynchronously was ready to be rendered, but it was rendered, actually. What that means for us, that means that the file was loaded, but it had to wait for 2 seconds to render the page. For the user, it was just a blank page for 2 seconds. After that, the page was there. That's really bad. In comparison with other products like Google or Amazon, that's the time that they have to load the whole page. And that was the time that we were spending just to load the navigation. Yeah, not good. So yeah, how to use async load, not just for components, but for content as well. In our case, we had a component called Layout Manager. We just did a smooth transition because at the moment that we had to do this, we were already fully integrated with Jira and Confluence. We need to find a way to make the transition smooth for both products without rollback all of them. So we just changed Layout Manager to Async Layout Manager. So it worked in both approaches. And at the end, we had something like this in the page. So the user were able to use async or not async up to the product. As example, Jira is using server-side render heavily. So they didn't have this, but Confluence is using client-side heavily. So we need to work in both ways. So yeah, components. Every time that we talk about components, we have a lot of aspects, curious aspects and unique aspects of this. But I always like to talk about plug and play because this should be the core of everything. Components should be easy to plug. Something that I don't need to do how we're doing things internally. I just need to use it, and that's all. Input and output, not something like this. And usually, things crash. And yeah, few concerns with this migration, just from async to sync or sync to async, is first one, bundle size. Second one, time to the first render. When we do those migrations, it shouldn't impact the final user. It shouldn't add more 2 seconds or 3 seconds because you did a code change. And you need to be able to prefetch this data. Prefetch, preload are techniques that we can use in any page, any web app that can improve the page load. So even before the page goes to do a smooth transition from, let's say, home to dashboards, you can preload the content. And when the user goes to that page, it will be automatically done. So it will be removed like a few seconds for this transition. So let's try something else. For the first time, in a component level, because we are analyzing, we're using a lot data-driven, but more like in the back-end or even the products, let's do something like a small piece. Try to work together with design system and use something data-driven. The first step was the bundle. And yeah, we added a few mechanisms to understand the bundle and check what's going on and how we can improve. The first component that we had to improve was the navigation itself. Because it was in every page, if you do a small improvement, you improve the whole product. And specifically, this file called async navigation next. This file, bundled, minified, uglified, gzipped, it was with 500K bytes. In that I'm talking gzipped, like without gzip, it would be like a few megabytes. So it was huge. And using webpack-bundle-analyzer to understand the internals and how we're using the packages, we got with this. The root cause of the all bundle increase was navigation next. And as folks can see the numbers, this is a screenshot of Bundlephobia. Great website. If you don't know about it, please use it. The bundle size of analytic navigation next was more than 100K bytes. So good shot. Let's go there, and let's go a little bit deep and try to improve. When we talk about bundles and how we can improve the build and the bundle size, we have different ways, different types to bundle. These are just quite a few of ones that we can use. And at the moment, we decided to use ESM for different reasons. One of the main reasons is it's totally tree-shakeable. One idea of tree-shakeable, for example, because we didn't have tree-shake, we were using at the moment Webpack 3, and Webpack 3 had a huge issue with tree-shake. It was not working 100%, but they were selling that was. And one idea was, okay, let's get the package, the navigation, and split in small pieces. But it was not good. Keep in mind that we were using this in production already. So that means that to do this migration, we need to start from scratch, and we need to roll back all the users to the first component. So yeah, we had to do changes in consumers. It was a high risk to do this. And we had to pretty much restart the whole job. Not ideal. Another approach was the concept of entry points, which is broadly used in other packages like Material UI or even a small one called Lodash. So in the first line, you can import specifically the file that you want, the function that you need. So just with that line, you can decrease your bundle. And the second one, in case you don't want to use this or for some reasons you cannot use, you can just import directly for the main package. And we did this. And we did some investigation on how Lodash and other packages are using, and we defined something else. We got the learnings, but we just upgraded a few things to our scenario. And one of the things that we got in mind was needs to be agnostic, what that exactly means. Let's see this example. Just a reminder for us. As folks can see, Lodash /compact is a way to import. That means that when you go to the root of Lodash package, you need to have a file called compact, right? So that means in summary that you need to have a file in the root folder. As everyone can see at the bottom, we have a file called navigation provider. We are exporting the component there. But internally, that component was inside a folder called components, and inside components, we have another folder called connected. At the bottom, we just wrote a file which was importing. Right? OK, so we have the folder structure. However, what if I just changed because reasons? I'm just trying to organize my component, organize my code way better. And instead of having the folder called connected, I just change it to providers. Because the name of the component is navigation provider, right? So it makes a lot of sense to do this change. And yeah, we have a problem just because of this small piece of change, right? Because for the users, they don't know how the things are working internally. They shouldn't. But we did a break change. And when they tried to bump, that was their feeling. Go to a place, go to a party, and everything just falling apart. I just did a small bump, like from version 4 to version 4.0.1. I shouldn't have any break changes, so how come this happened? And that was a good learning. The best learning was we need to be aware of the whole integration, not just things that are happening in the design system, need the things that are happening in a small team. We need to understand how the whole integration is working in products, design system, and other teams that are relevant and involved. All the point, we need to mitigate risks. With this, one of the learnings was we start to write more code mods. Code mods is a piece of code which helps you in the migration. When you try to bump a new version, or let's say if you wanted to migrate from React to version 15 to React to version 16, or Angular 7 to 8, you have few pieces of code that you can just run in your command line, and they can do the changes for the method name, for example, or even attributes that are deprecated, and we did that. It was quite useful. And with that, we improved the developer experience a lot. Another good point, instead of do all the things that we did, add in the file in the root folder and do some magic to do imports, we just got the idea to use Babel configuration. Babel has a plugin called Babel plugin transform reports that you can easily just configure. So when I'm calling Lodash, instead of go to Lodash directly, I can go to a specific folder in Lodash and call the file straight away. As an example here, I'm using, I configure a plugin for Navigation Next, and every time that we call Navigation Next is / some component, it goes to the folder called ESM. And for the users, that's the way they're using. So it's quite straightforward. They don't need to know the internals. They shouldn't. We don't need to deal with a lot of internal logic how to do this. Makes things way cleaner. With this change, we decreased the main package called Navigation Next from 132 to 10 kbytes. Quite good. And with all the change that we've done in the products, using Webpack DLL to improve the cache, improve the way that we are doing bundles, this is a quick configuration that was pretty much what we did. And this is so good that we just decreased from 500 kbytes to 30. This is a combination of Webpack, entry points, and async loads. We decreased a lot. Of course, it's Jira. So if someone says that's slow, I won't say anything. But that was huge, huge. And a few pages we decreased 4 seconds. So that was massive. Another topic, with this migration, we were able to do A/B testing, not just in the product, but in a design system level as well. So we were totally able to experiment, independent of the team. As example, we had this feature called Flyout, which is defined when the user gets a mouse and use the mouse over and the top of the menu, so that we have the menu flying out. At the first time that I heard this, I remember that it was quite tricky to understand that Flyout was that. Maybe because my background or something, but yeah. And yeah, it is a feature flag. It's already done, so users can turn on and turn off, up to them. But how we can monitor? So as I showed here, we can do experimentations, but how we can manage and understand if the experimentation was a success or not. Let's start from scratch. The first idea is to have a hypothesis. And the first one was, OK, we have a flyout. It's a feature will be turned on based on the menu when the user mouse over the menu. The second one, how we can avoid to have a lot of code, the same code base and start to have the same scenario that we had previously. So we need to think about things like optimistic preload and async load as well. And keep in mind that we have A/B testing. That code is there, but after 2 weeks or 2 months, maybe it's not relevant. So the experiment was not a success. We had a lot of learnings, but we shouldn't move on. Let's remove it. Because of that, we defined some standards, and this will help us a lot. Few definitions that we got was, first, every experiment should have a prefix, like a prop, which can pass down so you can configure from outside, and should always run asynchronously. And because you're running asynchronously, you don't have any impacts with some mechanisms, like you don't have you don't have any impacts on AppDex or page to load or time to interact for the users. And it should be straightforward. It should be something that's easy to add, and more than this, is easy to remove. As an example of the prefix, that's the way that we are doing. So every prop, every component which has an experiment has this prefix, experimental underscore the name of the feature that you can turn on and off. And it's pretty much this. So it's easy to do a quick search. It's easy to check from the team how many experimental features they're using, how many A/B testing they're doing, or more than this, how many A/B tests are happening in the same page. Because if you have a page with 3 A/B testings, they are having impacts one on each other. Other approach, async import. Again, that was one great idea. And what we defined was, since it can be easy to add and remove, if you have a feature that you wanted to improve or to experiment, duplicate the code. That will be living there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's easy. And if you have any feature that you need to add in the experimental one, you don't need to blow your code base. And in case that you leave the feature, just remove the old code, the old component. That's all. Keep analyzing. And really, that's the core of A/B testing or any experiment that you want to do. You need to understand what's the pros and cons, or even what's the impact of having that or not. That's one example of one of the experiments that we got. And as you folks can see, the blue one, that was a success. And yeah, a few impacts. First, now we have the shared experiments ownership. If you work in Jira, you can experiment in your side. If you work in the design system, you can experiment as well. Or if you work in any layer in the middle, you can experiment. So you're able to. All the flexibility between design system and products to improve our products. And you're totally up for innovation, or even if you want to do a migration, let's say that you're trying to use a new protocol to do requests. You want to use a new tooling that just will be improving you. So yeah, you can pretty much experiment in all layers. So that was the main goal. That was the main success. So quick recap. Every time that you do this, think in architecture. If you want to do A/B testing, you need to clean your kitchen first. So keep in mind that you need to enable experiments, and maybe you do some changes in your architecture. Think in a migration plan, or maybe a mitigation plan in case you have some issues. Define the load solution, and try to minimize risks as much as you can. So as next steps, Navigation Next is already released for all the users in Jira and in Confluence, and now we are doing the same migration for Bitbucket. So what can do next? You had improved the navigation. That means you improved the whole page in those products. So what else can do? As an idea of the whole change that we've done, And the benefits of those is that now we have another product called, another team working in an experiment called navigation next, which is an internal joke, but yeah. The idea is try to do more experiments and see the user conversion. How many clicks the user is taking to go to one page to another, how we can improve that. And we have all this platform available for developers, so we can do this quickly and easily. So yeah, that was my talk. It was really good to share some learnings in this. For sure, there's a lot of things that we need to improve. And if you want to know more details, how things are working in the background, let's just have a chat. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have some time for some questions. If you want to ask a question, you're going to have to put your hand up. I won't be able to find you if you don't.
Thanks for a great presentation. I'm quite interested in that the A/B test part. I'm just wondering for those like A/B tests, when you create those like experiments, do you also need to do the code change in your like the main product, or the A/B test can be developed decoupled from the main app?
Yeah, great question, by the way. What we are doing is we are developing the same component, but because we have design system and products totally decoupled, we can do this in the products, but we can do this in the design system as well. So for navigation, for example, which is a component which is available in the design system, what we are doing is we have a prop, which the products, when they're integrating, they just pass a prop through. And we do all the experimentations in a component level. So the design system is doing experimentation, and the products are just consuming. And we have a teamwork. So let's say if you're doing an experiment in Jira, you have a team to do this integration, and we have few teams for data analytics to understand the pros and cons of that. So we have a really teamwork between designers, design system, products, and analytics team.
Right, thank you.
Hi, Wilson. Just have a question around the one of the slides that you said you did the lazy loading of the not just the components but the content as well. Can you please elaborate on that one? Because
sure.
You get the data from API. I thought it's already lazy loaded. Thanks.
Yeah, there's different ways to do lazy loading, and in different places. Like you can do lazy loading front end and back end as well. What we are doing is using lazy loading massively. Jesus. Yeah, effects of the lunch, sorry. So we are doing lazy loading router level. So when the user goes to home page, it loads home. And if for 80% of the situations of your company, you're going straight away from home to dashboards, we are preload that code. So in a router level, so like big component, the big page component is preloaded. Inside that component, there are a few components which are asynchronous loaded as well. Let's say if you go to a dashboard, you have your graphs, and those graphs doesn't need to be in the same bundle. So we are doing async load for that component as well. And when that component is loaded, we are doing the call for the APIs. This is totally possible and totally flexible because the browser already deals with all the caches. So if you do this call like 50 times, it's already used the cached one. And the same for some API calls. Some of the calls that we do in the API, we can cache for like 5 minutes, for example, or we can cache for 30 minutes. Or we can even, because they are not something talking about the user, like not strict information, we can have different ways to store that. It makes things quicker because you don't need to go to Amazon or any other cloud provider to get the data and come back. For those experiments, actually, what we are doing is we have a layer of using GraphQL, and we have another layer caching GraphQL. So it can make things quicker. Let's say if that call is doing that component is doing a call for GraphQL, it takes, like, say, 5 seconds. Because we have the cache layer, it will take milliseconds. Does that make sense?
Get some roller skates.
So I have a question regarding, do you have any resource links on how to reduce the packages and what would be recommendations? So for instance, if you have Angular or your custom things, or just for React?
Yeah, I have for both. Actually, that regards to Angular specifically, that is a series of videos from a folk called Minko Guchev, and he's quite famous in the Angular community. But the concept is the same. It's try to use and abuse for async imports and check what's the most important. Try to use some manipulation to understand what the user flow based on the product. Let's say if the product the user is going every time from home to dashboard, you can try to preload that content, and you can use prefetch. There is a different ways to improve this mechanism. In these slides, we have few links in those images. I'll share this right after this talk. But yeah, if you need something more specifically, we can have a chat.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, folks.